Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Visine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off. Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Visine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Hero Paranormal Podcast. This is Ryan, the original outlaw of the airwaves, bringing you a slam dunk podcast with one of the coolest guests ever. It's going to be fun. It is really neat. You know, I've listened to podcasts for years. I was a big fan of Midnight in the Desert. Our guest tonight is actually a guest host on Midnight in the Desert. She's also the acclaimed host of Into the Fray talk radio. And she's co-authored a book with a very neat name, Beyond the Fray, that delves deeply into Bigfoot. And it is an amazing collection of chilling first-person accounts that will make you think twice about going into the woods. Those are the actual words from the author of The Beast of Boggy Creek, Lyle Blackburn. So it is going to be fun. Also, check out heroparanormal.com. Check out, for fun, spacewolfresearch.com, just something we do on the side. And if you want to download podcasts quickly and efficiently, go to heroparanormal.podbean.com. There's also a patron section there where you can get the goodies. So Shannon is super cool. She signed the book that she sent to me and sent me some of her cards, the Into the Fray cards. And I'll tell you, some of the coolest business cards I've seen to date. And definitely cool. Mad props on that. She nailed it, hit it out of the park with that. Shannon is very knowledgeable of many, many things in the paranormal. So this will be really cool getting into the depths of this. This book is amazing. Highly recommend everybody buy it. I'm going to steal a line out of it that I absolutely love. Now come with me as we again depart, but this time we go beyond the fray. Shannon LeGro, welcome to the Hero Paranormal Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Ryan.
This is such a cool book. This is, people say it all the time, but I really like the fact that it is different events and stories, and it just kind of keeps the hair on the back of your neck standing up. I could relate to a lot of the stories because it's just really well put together. The whole Bigfoot thing, were you interested first, or did you have an experience first? How did you get involved with that?
Yeah, so actually my first experience had nothing to do with Bigfoot, and actually occurred not too far from, one of your necks of the woods, and that was in Utah, but it had nothing to do with Bigfoot at all. It was shadow people. So I remember at some point, all of a sudden, years and years ago, just diving headlong into books. And when podcasts came around, I started to consume as many of those as I could. But, a lot of people go, well, it was The Beast of Boggy Creek, or I saw the Patterson-Gimlin film, or they have or they had their sighting, of course, as you mentioned. I don't really remember exactly the moment that I was like, Bigfoot is my thing, that's amazing. But it certainly has become, I would say, the big guy is biggest in my heart as far as the subject matter that I cover on my show. So I'm head over heels in love with Bigfoot.
That is so cool. The big guy, I like that. It's true. At least it is somewhat of a mysterious, it's kind of like a gateway to the other paranormal items, or at least it was for me, because there's so much mystery surrounding Bigfoot and legend and lore and cultural, beliefs. This is really big. In the writing of your book, I'm sure you spoke with all kinds of people who had different ideas about Bigfoot. What were some of the most interesting?
Well, as far as what they are, I don't think that anybody, because of the fact that the book is just basically their encounters. What happened not only during the encounter, what did the creature look like, but the other side of that, which is just as important, is what did it do to the person that saw it? I think that the human aspect of whether it's UFOs or Bigfoot or ghosts or shadow people, it gets lost a lot of the time. And as fascinating as it is to hear the descriptions, what happened to the person physically, mentally? Do they still have PTSD? Do they go in the woods? Is more fascinating. But to answer your question, we didn't really dive into that too much. If people get off onto tangents, which I love tangents, by the way, on my show, it wasn't so much that I included that particularly in the book. And this wasn't on my show, but I just was recently talking with some other folks about this. But I think one of the most interesting theories that I've heard about Bigfoot, and maybe you've heard this, Ryan, was that Bigfoot was placed here on the planet by aliens to mine precious metals for them, because that's what the aliens need to power their ships. So that's one of the more interesting ones that I've heard. That wasn't on my show. But as far as my show goes, I've had everybody from Gigantopithecus to maybe it's a human hybrid to it's just, an undiscovered ape species. So, which I would prefer, I think, out of all of those, of course, to be that, because if it's anything paranormal, which just means abnormal, if it's anything like that and they have any quote-unquote weird abilities, then we probably won't ever figure out what they are.
Yeah, and it seems like that route of thinking it's very likely. I mean, it could be possible that a cryptozoological creature is able to, hide well. I mean, there's so many creatures that do other things well. I mean, look at the great white shark. That, in my opinion, is like practically paranormal. And it is just a fish. So there's a lot of discussion that goes down, and I know that it can get pretty heated between the two camps, those that think it's interdimensional, those who mention the UFO connection, and those who don't want anything to do with it. Do you get to talk to Mr. Meldrum, Dr. Meldrum, when you made the book?
No, I've only met Jeff Meldrum once in person, but I haven't actually spoken to him since. But I would love to. I would love to get the book in his hands and see what he thought about some of the encounters within. And even though a lot of the encounters are pulled from my show, of course, there are several in there that haven't been heard anywhere. So I would hazard to say, and so far the listeners that have gotten the book are going, gosh, even though I've heard these on your show, it's different to consume it in word form, and they were just as creeped out. They're like, I was creeped out for a second time by the same story. So, and moving forward with our next books, I think I'm going to put even more stories that have just not been heard anywhere else.
That would be great. It's super descriptive. Yeah, I'm not super close with Jeff Meldrum either. It's kind of same as you. Met him a couple times, once or twice, but yeah, when it comes to those two camps, it seems like, although he's very open-minded, he's the go-to guy for the scientific camp and trying to get some legitimacy into the field. So I think that's really cool, because there is some legitimacy that's coming in to the Bigfoot field. It's not just the Patterson-Gimlin like it was for ever. And it is, that has its qualities, but there is a lot more scientifically that I think, DNA, hair samples. I remember I got a call once from another researcher, and I said, what are you doing? Where are you at? And he said, I've got a bunch of, the least favorite samples, some dung in the back of his truck, and he was driving up.
Right.
He was driving up to see Jeff Meldrum. I was like, oh, I'm glad I'm not you. But
yeah.
There's a lot of features in the book. The descriptions are terrifying. The encounters, and I could see into its eyes. I thought that was really cool, and a lot of them leave you wondering, how often are these sightings taking place that people don't report them?
Oh well, gosh. I mean that you hit it on the head there. I mean, I think we're just scraping the surface. If you take all of the reports that are given just to podcasts alone, forget, the online area of things like the BFRO. Yeah, that's it. It's how many of these people are like, well, I'm going to be made fun of and I'm going to be looked at like a kook, so I'm not going to tell anybody about this. And, you know, you and I, look, we have good relationships and people trust us. And so to be trusted like that, and they come on and they tell you these things, it's an incredible thing. And I think if we would probably be shocked if we found out just how many people are out there that have had encounters and just not told a soul.
It does seem that way. I mean, it seems like every year, and I want to get into your Utah sighting too. I think that's so exciting. But every year there's sightings, and you see it on the news, whether it be in almost all the states, you know, oh, could it be this, or a hiker saw that? And it's usually kind of brushed off and forgotten about quite quickly, and people yell hoax a lot. And those functions kind of take it away from the public view, because the reality is there's a lot of these sightings taking place, and it seems like there's some communication that this person had with this animal, or was this just an idea that they had? What were some of the more interesting things along those lines?
You know, I've heard over the years a lot near a wooded area, they say that, you know, they'll leave something out for the Bigfoot creatures in the woods, and the Bigfoot will leave something back for them. In fact, sorry, not to name drop or anything, but I finally got a chance to talk to George Knapp the other night, which was amazing. And he brought up, we were talking about habituation, and he brought up a story that a gentleman told on his show, where the gentleman was leaving like apples and things like that out, and the Bigfoot, because I mean, what else is a Bigfoot going to bring him for the most part? The Bigfoot kept bringing back dead squirrels. You know, it's like, oh, you leave me food, so I'll leave you food. And I personally hadn't heard anything that specific before, but it is interesting to think that they are smart enough to know. I mean, if that's what's going on, of course, there's a lot of conjecture going on there that we're assuming that it was the Bigfoot, right? But it's not. They're obviously extremely intelligent, and I've always liked to call them the Liam Neesons of the woods, because they're just, you know, going off. They're an undiscovered ape species. They are so down to the bone out there in the woods. We just cannot compare. And I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that they do things like bury their own dead, or, you know, even a house pet, bless their heart. No, they'll go to a closet, or under a bed or something, behind a dresser, and because they know they're on their way out. Now, I do realize that there's been stories of Bigfoot that have been either hit by a car, or shot by a hunter. Many of those stories, of course, there is heard the tales. I know you two have, Ryan. I mean, on your show, and even Skinwalker Ranch stuff. You know, the whole government side of things, the government coming in and covering up tracks, or taking away a body, or what this might be. But I don't think that these things go very far by themselves. I think they're very tactical. So if one of them does get clipped by a car, I just don't. It is frustrating, because why wouldn't one of them take a hard enough hit to just be laying in the road, and then the next person, if the first person left, and there we have our proof. But it just hasn't happened yet. I don't really see why they couldn't be smart enough to help each other out. Like, hey, we can't let these people figure us out. We have to avoid them. They obviously want to watch us, but they know to avoid us.
Yeah. And you cut out for a second when you were saying you call it what was it in the woods? It sounded
the Liam Neeson of the woods.
I like that. The Liam Neeson, exactly. It's like there's a lot of features with these stories that this is, you know, you get the hunter. It seems like hunters seem more scared of it, more like they think it's a beast, and hikers are a little less, more aware, but less scared. But you can't make any true and fast judgments about any of these sightings, because some of them do have government ties. And then there's really strange stories that you hear about, like, people that have these things visiting them all the time. So I know that there's probably a lot we could learn if we could understand a creature that not only has such a small impact, no pun intended, but I mean, a big imprint,
Yeah.
big imprint, but small impact, talk about hardly noticeable ecologically. And yet it's still just a thing of mystery that I think everybody sort of has that thing in them where you kind of think it should be there.
I mean, I'm a hopeful believer in these things. Imprinted on me the fact that these really might be out there. I mean, until I have a sighting, I'm not going to say, I know. But, I mean, as you've read in the book and you've heard on the podcast and you've talked, it's one of those what you wish for, because some of these folks have life-changing sightings to where they become obsessed, but they are also terrified and go hiking or fishing, hunting, things that they used to love to do is now ruined.
Yeah, I totally agree. And sorry, you cut out for, again, I'm not sure why that was happening, but it can be traumatic. People can have post-traumatic stress from this and disorders from this for sure. Did you run into a lot of that? One
gentleman that out to an area, he had a bid with, a big name, Bigfoot researcher, one of the old school guys. And this gentleman actually takes a topographic map of this area and draws a circle and says, you don't ever go in here, ever. This is like where they live. You know what he's like, do you know what I'm saying? To this guy, David. David's like, yeah, I get it. I'm not going to go. Well, he goes, of course. And not only does he go, but he tells his wife that he's going on a business trip, which at that point in time was not strange for him to do so. So literally nobody knows where he's going, and he goes to this area. And I mean, long story short, he never sees a thing, but that doesn't even matter because he ends up getting screamed at from multiple creatures. He's crawling out of this area that he went to on his hands and knees, really thinking that he was going to be killed. No one's going to know where he went. Nope. His kids are going to think he abandoned them. And he admitted to me, and he was very emotional. This was on the show. It was entitled Boundaries Crossed. Very early episode, by the way. He was crying. And he thought he wasn't going to make it out of there. And these things were so good at what they were doing that they were paralleling him out the entire time. And he made himself walk because he's, that whole predator-prey thing, he was quite worried about that, and probably rightfully so. And then I think it was like the last, 50 yards. Okay, time to run. And he didn't go back in the woods even during the day for, I think it was nearly 25 years. And even now, I've spoken to him a number of times over the years since he first told that story. He admits he still goes out during the day. He's always armed. He tells people where he's going. And he goes out with other people. And it being a really, truly life-changing event. And in that case, like I said, he didn't even see them. He had a flashlight and made the choice to not look at them. And mind you, he went in there for an experience. And boy, did he get one. But he admitted, he's like, I had a flashlight, but I don't think that I could have dealt with it actually seeing them because it was already terrifying enough.
Yeah, that would be horrifying. And the having the flashlight and still not looking, that is like... Yeah.
Isn't that tough though, Ryan? I mean, because I've always tried to put myself in these situations as I'm listening to them or reading them. I mean, do you think that you would have done the same thing that David did, or do you think that he was on the right track with just not looking?
I can't say that I would look. I know that I would want to, but I don't know if I would. Yeah,
and you know what else? And I'd be interested to hear your opinion on this too. We hear about the different types. They have labels and all of that. I try not to get too bogged down in type 1, type 2, type 10, all that. But you hear of the more gorilla-looking ones, facial features wise, and then you hear of the more human-looking ones, which I've always said I think would be out a lot more. For whatever the implications might be, you can take that how you want. I think that would be more difficult and that looks more like a gorilla. I don't know. What do you think about that if you had a sighting like that?
I'm fascinated by the sightings that look, like you said, they have kind of like those human features. I think that would be more realistic, and fascinated by a lot of the different research that's being done. I mean, there are some pictures that are making their way around the web that are very debated on whether they, close-ups of faces and such. And I know that can't think of the gentleman's name, but his means of, I think it's impressive, but his means of obtaining those pictures and what he goes through and explains that he does is pretty brutal. But it is, why can't I think of his name? But yeah, the Sentinel idea that they have lookouts, and I absolutely think that the more intelligent be that they would have features much like what is making the rounds. I'm not saying that I'm on the fence whether that's actually legitimate, but
right.
If it were, that's exactly what I would picture it to be. What I would expect is something that looks a little bit like us.
David Price and Melba Ketchum have been, and they claim that they got stuff back, and it said part human. For these samples that came from a Bigfoot creature. So, all of it's hotly contested in any camp, though. I just like the fact that there's people out there going full bore in whatever they believe or they want to prove. That is fine. I don't want to knock anybody for anything, because I think that everything should be left on the table because we don't know. And there are no experts in Bigfoot because we don't have a body and we don't have one. Heaven forbid, I never want to see this, but behind 3 foot or 3 inch thick acrylic at a zoo or something. We just don't know. There's no experts in this at all.
That is so true, and it really would be the worst thing that could possibly happen is to take an animal like that and put it into something like a zoo. It's I mean, even if you go to, I remember going to the Cleveland Zoo many times when I lived up there still, and there was a male silverback, and every time I went there and to look at him, he was sitting in the corner, basically rocking back and forth, facing the wall. I mean, it just breaks your heart because that would be my main reason as to why we should never, if it ever came down to it, stick them behind glass and so we can gawk and point at them because they're far too intelligent for that. They are, and they have so much relevance with Native Americans and the lore, the legend, the old man on the mountain, whatever you want to call them. I remember there's many stories I've heard that they are kind of, that would be the last thing that would be, in a zoo, the last thing they would do. Is there something to the spiritual aspect that you've gathered in looking into this, kind of going beyond where most people go and getting a really deep look at this? Is there a spiritual or, essential feeling that people have had that you've spoken with about the animal?
Yeah, I've had... It doesn't happen often, and I think it's mostly, again, things that I've heard on other shows, but I did have one person that said basically they got a sense from it almost, tantamount to mind speak or telepathy. Like the creature was basically saying, like, I'm not going to hurt you, or, don't go any further, or you need to leave, whatever the message that it needed to impart was. But, that could be the person's primal instincts kicking in, and maybe it was more their inner voice. You know what I mean? So it's really hard, and that's a gray area. And again, I'm not going to laugh at anybody's encounter or question what they said. That's the beauty of doing shows like ours, is that when people come on and they share something, it's up to the listener to decide, or the reader to decide, if they think that it's a true story or not, you know. So, there have definitely been a lot of people out there, just in general, that think these things have some real, true, extra sensory abilities, and that they can tap into not only real primal stuff and just live out in these truly harsh environments, you know, northern Canada and Alaska. Every once in a blue moon, you've heard an Alaska story, but that they have other abilities that are, to us, pretty fantastical, really. And I don't know that I 100% believe that they have that ability, but then again, people have said if we could use more of our brains, that we might be able to do the same thing. So I don't know. What if they're just able to tap into that part of their brains more? I'm not sure.
Absolutely. And there's the neat thing is, like you said, the places, the climates, it's really broad and varied. And I loved the Bigfoot in Nevada story because obviously I'm in Nevada and you are, and a state like Nevada is usually not what you think of as a place where you would see a Bigfoot.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that one up, because this one was so cool, because there was nothing truly fantastic about it. It was not an over-the-top story. Basically, they're driving, a husband and a wife. She's driving, he's in the passenger seat, and it's dark out, and they see something so tall that the guy remembers thinking, oh, it's a guy on a dirt bike, you know. And man, he's really hot on this thing, and he could tell that the thing was going to make a turn. And of course, once it turned, he realized, oh man, that thing's going so fast. This guy's gonna crash on his dirt bike, making a turn like that at that speed. And that's when he realized he describes it as a refrigerator with legs, and it actually disappeared basically into a neighborhood. And this is, like you said, not an area that you would think would have any activity whatsoever. But here's why I love this story, because, and a lot of it was kept private, and that's for specific reasons. A lot of times it does get stressful, because if I could release who told this, or the friend that told him the other information, it would glean even more of a stamp of approval from people, probably. But anonymity is always tantamount if that's what they want. So he and his wife had this sighting in December, and there's even a horrible smell, which is a lot of times attributed to poor Bigfoot creatures, right? They're just smelly things sometimes, and that smell stayed around for like 3 days. The dogs were acting weird, and then it would leave. And it wasn't but a couple of weeks later, he finds out that a friend of his had a sighting in December, the same month, in Nevada. So here we're looking at a situation where we're going, okay, well, they probably don't hang out here too much. There's not a lot of cover for the most part. But the idea that they migrate and they move through different areas that may have less cover for a short amount of time is certainly, I think, a possibility. So I know that I didn't give the specific location, and I can tell you off the air probably here, Ryan. But yeah, I don't think it's nuts to think they're moving through somewhere that doesn't have a whole bunch of woods to get to another place that does.
Right, and that's awesome. It is. It reminds me of, when I've gone out with other Bigfoot researchers, Shannon, and they show you things that other people would just think are so subtle and, that's nothing. But, you start noticing some of these little things, like the way they sort of groom trails or paths for, like you said, if they're moving through there. And they can do this when you look at it, it's like one of those things, the deeper you look, it starts to kind of make sense, which is so crazy, because like the paranormal is a broad spectrum, and I try not to get locked on any one thing, but Bigfoot is so hard not to get locked into. It is just so hard, because it's so intriguing and mysterious and always available. It's not like, it's just there. It's not like you have to, wait for Halloween night and go, it's just something that's always there. And,
yes.
and, getting back to the Utah sighting, cause I can't let that escape. You said you may have seen something in Utah a little bit.
Oh, yes, I certainly did. And, that's really the thing that catapulted me into, it didn't happen right away, obviously, but that's what I credit for my, obsession with just talking to more people who have had sightings of all sorts. So, so I grew up here in Vegas. Parents got divorced, and Dad buys he lived here still, of course, but he bought a cabin in Utah, and that is in Duck Creek, Utah, on Cedar Mountain, which is just up from Cedar City. And lovely place. It gets a lot of snow in the winter. We would mostly be there during the summertime, and we would go up there nearly every weekend that we were with them. And then, of course, in the summer, we would just spend weeks and weeks up there. So a few things that we like to do, it was a very short list, was basically we would go fishing and we would ride our four-wheelers. And at the time this encounter happened, I was 12 or 13, so around 1992. And my dad had gone down into Cedar City, which was about a 40-minute drive one way. So he'd be gone for a while. So me being a smart kid that I was like, oh, well, we're going to go riding four-wheelers, and Dad's not here, so I'm not going to wear my helmet and goggles, which that'll be important here in a few minutes, and anybody that's worn those things knows why. So I went out with my brother and my stepbrother. We each had our own machines, and this area around these cabins is set up in a nice grid pattern. There's not a lot of traffic, but it is dirt roads. So that's where we like to ride. And it was the middle of the day, a clear day, nice and sunny, nothing weird. And we're riding down this road. And because I didn't have my helmet and goggles on, I hung back because I didn't want the dirt in my face and in my nose and in my mouth. So we're moving at a good clip down this road. And at some point during the ride, I look off to my right, and you know Utah very well, but there's aspen trees there for anybody that doesn't know. And in Utah, it's not really a lot of ground brush like you'd see in Ohio or something. So the ground is for the most part more clear than other areas of the country. So I look off to my right, and I see 4 absolutely pitch black humanoid figures running through the woods, and they're paralleling me. They're going my direction, the same way I'm going. And the first thing that strikes me is they are like the deepest, darkest cutouts from the blackest night, and then somehow they were still darker than that. And again, it was sunny, but it was like no light could find them at all. There was some, of course, cover from the trees, but they didn't fit. It was just wrong. And I realized that within milliseconds. And then, of course, they're moving their arms and legs, like kind of, and now when I look back, I'm like, this is hilarious because they weren't from here. Did they really need to make that humanish movement, And also, this part's a little hard to describe, but they were moving as if the trees weren't even there. They didn't need to dodge them or, jump over a log or whatever was in their way. And it's not to say that I could see them moving through them. It's just they didn't have to move for them. And that's really hard to describe, but that's the best way I can do it. So I watched them for about a count of 5, which is a pretty good clip if you actually count it out. And then, of course, I was still hauling butt on my four-wheeler, so I had to check my path. And by the time I turned back, they were gone. And the reason I mentioned the goggles, and I know you go riding a lot and do these things, Ryan, is you can't hardly see anything out of those things. So had I had the goggles on, I wonder if I would have even really been able to see them. I think they were about 30 feet back in the woods, but I got a really good view of them from where I was because I didn't have anything covering my eyes or my face. So I caught up to my brothers, and I'm like, hey, I'm done. I am done for the day. And by the time my dad got back, I was telling him the story, and he goes, well, he's an ex-military guy. So he's like, oh, they do military exercises out here all the time, Shan. That's what they do. I'm like, no, Dad, these were not people at all. And still to this day, he remembers me telling that story. And he's so funny because he admits, he's like, I really didn't, he's very supportive of everything I'm doing, but he's like, I didn't believe you then, and I don't know that I still believe you now. So, but one thing about my encounter that comes up time and again, because I have people come on my show to talk about shadow people, and it's so much more messed up when it's in your own house. But I think if one of those things had looked over at me, turned their head, if they would have had a face, I don't know, turned their head or waved at me or something, it would have been a completely different situation. And it did scare me for a while. I didn't go back out riding for nearly a week. And then after that, I was pretty cautious and stayed closer to my brothers. But that was my inception story, really. And of course, you start to get older and other things get on your mind as you're a teenager, and then you're in school and super busy. So I didn't really have any outlets except for reading books. But that's when, like I said, then I started to listen to the podcast. And now I'm lucky enough to have my own and get to talk to people that have had similar experiences. So, yeah, that was my inception story. And I've had people go, well, maybe they were Bigfoot. I'm like, oh, no. That is not at all what I saw. I still have yet to see a Bigfoot. So I just think I saw like a glimpse into another dimension for a second. I don't quite know what that was. I don't pretend to know, but that was my big story. That's the only thing I've ever seen with my own eyes that just, of course, blew me away.
It's so cool. It's a super creepy story. And that area, like you said, my gosh, if anybody, Duck Creek it's super, like you wouldn't expect to see something like that but
no.
Right. And it's the dust. Oh my gosh. I when I go up there, I usually have to wear one of those handkerchiefs over my mouth too, even.
Oh, it's terrible. And I don't even, I've been up there in the last year, and it's still not paved up there, which I don't expect it to be. I mean, you're up there to be part of the outdoors. They're not ever going to pave that up there, I hope. But, it's just logistics, you don't want dust in your eyes. So you got to cover up. You don't want to be breathing that stuff in all day. But, yeah, Duck Creek is, I love that place. One of my favorite places on the planet. I wasn't scared at all to be back there because, that's a one-off. I mean, I'm sure you hear tons of people with these one-off stories. They have something just nutty happen to them and nothing ever again. And that's pretty much, I've had some interesting experiences besides that, but really that's the only thing I've ever seen that just, I'm like, that was bonkers. And I can still see them clear as day all these years later.
Man, it's a perfect story and perfect place too. I think it's really interesting that you mentioned your father said that he was military and that they did ops back there. That's very interesting. My late father-in-law, he was a Navy SEAL, and he would always be like not really believing in things when I would talk with him. However, he did, and he was from Oregon. And I'll tell you, Shannon, one day we were talking and he said, yeah, him and his wife were driving down the road and they saw one, just their typical Oregon sighting.
Wow.
And he's like, I like you said, he doesn't want to believe it, but he saw it. And that reminds me a lot,
So he had the typical road sighting where they saw it for a few seconds. It was like crossing the road or something.
That was it. And I was
I love it.
Yeah. I was like, what did you do? And he's like, well, we really didn't have a chance to do anything. We just kind of slowed down, saw it, and moved on.
Wow.
But you hear about it all the time. It's very common.
Well, so that was up in Oregon. Was it a pretty big creature? They get a little bigger up in the Pacific Northwest for the most part.
I remember that he said it was big, and they were in a larger truck, and it was just one of those things that, and when I talked to my mother-in-law, she's like, yeah, we just kind of looked at each other and said, well, okay.
Wow.
what else?
Oh my gosh, I love that story. Thanks for sharing that with me.
Yeah, of course. And there's the military mindset is hard to kind of, get the things that don't exist to get them to believe that. So that's actually Wow, I think your story is fascinating, and what a perfect place to have it. Holy cow. Have you had any experiences with Division of Wildlife Resource people, rangers, or anything along those lines, even maybe law enforcement who have had experiences or continue to have them?
Yeah, I have. I've talked to people that it's mostly on the ranger side of things, but that gets real tricky because they can't really come out and say that they work for the Park Service, and those are situations where, like I said, you kind of have to keep their names real hush hush, and we'll either use no name or just a false first name only kind of a thing. But when you get these rangers with these stories, and they're constantly just being, vague to people that come to the parks. Oh, well, there was a large predator sighting recently, so avoid this trail or whatever it might be. But I mean, if rangers could ever come out and really talk about what they've seen, talk about the treasure trove of information. And, as far as the parks go, they have all kinds of secretive things going on, even if you just dig into the missing 411 stuff, how they don't keep lists of missing people and all that stuff that David Pilates has looked into. So I would certainly love to pick the brain of a ranger that has been in one of these quote-unquote hot spots for years, and to obviously see if they've seen anything personally, tracks or an actual creature, and then of course maybe some of the stories they've heard over the years. I mean, somebody can make a killing coming out and telling all the information that they know.
I can't agree more. I've always wondered, that they have to see stuff, but like you said, it gets pretty tricky. The neatest stuff is these fire. Have you seen these fire lookouts that they have in the forests? I've always wanted. Of course, you can't access them, but I did speak with a ranger out. Where was it? It was in Arizona. Again, weird places. You see this, the Mogollon Monster. I'm not saying that, over the Mogollon Rim, and we went up there and we were talking to the guy and all kinds of great conversation. And when I said that, like, have you ever seen anything strange? And like, yeah, that same thing you said, they give you that look like, oh man, yeah, can't talk about it.
Yeah, they're like, oh, you had to go there, and you can tell they know stuff. And they're dying to say something, but most of the time they just won't do it. So, oh yeah, that would be, a killing coming out and telling the stories. I don't so much mean that they can make a fortune. I mean, maybe they could. It was just more as far as the data collection that we could get off of that,
It would be amazing. And I love the David Pilates stuff that he's got going on, and some of the interesting tunnel formations that kind of blew me away when there's a lot of coincidences, but the amount of missing people, and especially children, is just brutal.
It makes you think twice when you get your kiddos out around you. Mm. It really does. Like, no matter what is going on there with that, it makes you think twice. That's
the truth. Was, or is, I guess, is there a lot of cases? We were just talking about Nevada, Arizona, a lot of these arid climates, you'll hear people say, oh yeah, I saw in this high desert area, I saw a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot. And around the Four Corners area, I know that there is a lot of research going on there. And I mean, we're literally talking about not very dense brush. Are you noticing that really makes a difference or not? If there's a forest there or not?
Honestly, that's a great question. I don't think that it does. Because I think if they find a great spot where, you mentioned caves, maybe they can go subterranean a little bit. I mean, heck, a lot of these areas even have mines, abandoned mines. I know I've got a ton of them out here at the sheep, we do at the sheep range where Tenny Beach went missing. That's a whole nother fascinating topic. I don't think that it's crazy that they might be in a less foliage covered area. You hear the Yucca Man out at Joshua Tree National Park. There's all kinds of places for them to hide. And like I said in the beginning, they're just so built for business that they can avoid us very easily. We're loud, and we have all these, really probably very potent smells to their nose. And they are predators, and, they are hunters of deer and whatever else they can probably get their hands on for foraging and being opportunistic hunters and things. I think it's easy for them to avoid us. So if they're in an area with less coverage, they just dart off to somewhere else that they can hide from us. And I think that the idea, of course, the migration patterns of these things is something that I know there are people out there working on things like that. But, I mean, gosh, it's so hard to pin down movements of a creature that you might see once in your entire life and then never again. And that one sighting was like striking gold in and of itself. So if we can pin down any migration patterns or, I wish, but again, this goes back to, do we want them in zoos? I would never want to see that, and I don't really think it's right just specifically to go out and kill one for the purposes of proof, although I do think we need the body for the proof. I'd rather we come across it some other way, but that's just because I'm an animal lover. But it would be interesting to have somebody go out with some, trank darts or something and be able to collect what we needed from it and then release it. But what a scenario that would be. That is so far-fetched. But I don't know. It makes me feel better about being around here. I don't know about you. I mean, and like I said, I'll tell you off the air more about that Bigfoot in Nevada sighting. But I get bummed out because I'm not in the woods anymore. And I used to go to Salt Fork State Park in Ohio all the time, where I've had cool things happen. And now I'm like, I'm back in Nevada. I love Vegas, and I grew up here. But and I'm happy to be out of the snow. But I miss the woods so much, and I miss feeling like I could have the opportunity to see one. I don't think it's impossible where we are, not Vegas specifically, but it kind of is. But to go on the outskirts and possibly see one, it makes me feel a little bit less depressed to not be in the woods.
Yeah, that's really cool, that Nevada story. I'd love to hear that. That's awesome. And the way that you explained that they're built for business, that's the coolest explanation I've heard, because they're just so solid. And you hear all the time about hunters, and there's a story in your book also about a young, I think he was 16 and he took a shot at it. And, in these life death scenarios, you'll hear hunters will shoot at these, and there's no, they don't get fazed by it. And I mean, that's like seriously built for business. Have you come across any strange tales that go into detail about just how built for business they are, hunters like that have not been able to kill them, or, you hear it all the time, but I've never really heard about any that are like, like you said, a car hitting it, or you would think that would probably leave some kind of a body. The body scenario, is there anybody that you've talked to that thought they may have killed one?
Not me specifically, but I have heard of a story of, well, actually a few stories, people on other shows that claim that they know they hit it or they even saw it go down. But then, of course, you have the other Bigfoot to contend with. They know what guns are, and they know what we do when we're in the woods. They don't trust us. Like I said, they like to watch us, but they don't trust us in any way, shape, or form. So, yeah, I certainly have heard stories of people claiming that they shot it and it went down. But, of course, either they left because they got freaked out, or the Bigfoot, the other Bigfoot started to scream at them, or, these creatures are so massive that I'd imagine you have to have a gun tantamount to what those jerks use when they shoot the rhinos or something, something that big to take down some of these larger 8 to 10 foot tall, 900-pound Bigfoot. Because usually what the hunters carry, unless they're, what's the gentleman's name, American Sniper, and get that perfect shot, you're not taking that thing down. It's just not going to happen. Now, what happens to the Bigfoot after, if you hit it in the shoulder or something like that, it's not like they got betadine out there and antibiotics. I'm sure it's not good for them either way to get shot. But the stories of the hunters, sometimes I feel worse for them because hunting was actually something they'd love to do a lot. Or if they were younger, it was like their rite of passage. And I have one in the book, it was even his first time hunting. And he was like finally, on his own, got the rifle out at the tree stand, and then he runs into a Bigfoot. And he realized he came between it and a deer that it was hunting. They were actually it's called two hunters for that reason, because he was out there for deer, and obviously the Bigfoot was too. And he was at the far back of this property, nowhere near his uncles and cousins who were also hunting. And that was another one where he really thought he was going to die. And in that case, he leveled the rifle at this thing, and it basically, did the whole puffing up the chest thing, like, oh, really? You really want to do that? One of those situations. So they're very smart, and they know what weapons are and what hunters do in the woods. So it's just the case. You got to be careful what you wish for. That one changed his life too, and he is not a fan of going out in the woods without being armed and really not being out there too late at night, because it was getting around dusk when that encounter happened for him.
Man, that is pretty spooky stuff. It is. It's pretty scary. And Shannon, you have a bunch of stuff coming up. I don't want to get stuck on the book or limited to that, but it's such a fresh perspective and awesome book. But could you tell our guests all the stuff you have coming up? I think you have an upcoming documentary on UFOs and other things going on.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Ryan. Yeah. So I was fortunate enough to be the host for On the Trail of UFOs. That is a documentary coming out from Small Town Monsters. I'm sure a lot of your listeners will be familiar with them. They've done work on Mothman. They've got Bell Witch stuff coming up. They've done Minerva Monster. We've done, of course, On the Trail of Bigfoot, which is already out on Amazon Prime or through smalltownmonsters.com. But later this year, On the Trail of UFOs will come out, and we traveled thousands of miles over many trips and talked to many fascinating people about either the side of it where they come from for the research, or a sighting, or we talked to people that had incredible witness encounters and how it changed their life specific to the UFO subject. So that'll be out later this year. And in fact, if you guys are part of Facebook, we're doing we always do a Kickstarter live event, and that'll be February 6th at 7 p.m. I believe that's Pacific Standard Time, but you can check my Facebook for more information on that. And also, G. Michael Hoff is the co-author, along with myself, for Beyond the Fray Bigfoot, and we've got Beyond the Fray Paramalgamation is up for pre-order right now. We're in the process of writing that, and that should be due out late April of this year, so pretty quick. And paramalgamation is a word that I came up with a long time ago for an episode of my show. It was paranormal, just all over the place craziness. And I'm like, well, this is an amalgamation. It's a paramalgamation. So that was the inception of that word, and that is exactly what this book will be. Some of my favorites from my show, Into the Fray, ones that are just so difficult to classify. They do not fit in any neat, tidy little box like a ghost or a shadow person or a whatever. Creatures and spooky stuff, and even, for lack of a better term, even a Wendigo. A woman said she encountered a Wendigo. One of the most terrifying stories I've taken a long time. That was a recent episode. But again, we're adding stories in there that will not be on the show because usually it's because people are just not comfortable coming on, and that's totally fine. So currently collecting stories for that. So if anybody out there is, into sharing their stories but doesn't want to be on a show, that's always an option too. So yeah, Beyond the Fray Paramalgamation it will be ready to rock in April.
So much going on, so cool, and it's just such a fresh perspective you bring to the paranormal, and your passion for the paranormal really shows, Shannon. I appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing some of the coolest things that you got to deal with, and I hope to talk to you soon. I'll definitely keep an eye out for all that stuff, and I hope our listeners do too.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Thanks for inviting me on.
Well, there you have it. Shannon LeGro telling us about her new Bigfoot book, Beyond the Fray. She has a lot going on, and her passion for the paranormal is something that is hard to keep up with. She is all over the place, always researching and always working on something. I was very happy to be able to get her on the program and hope to have her on again soon and talk to her soon. Really exciting and interesting stuff that she's doing. Definitely check it out. Also, check her out at intothefrayradio.com. She is on social media. You can see her there, and keep an eye out for that new upcoming documentary on the trail of UFOs. Should be great. Also, check out heroparanormal.com. Check out our quick and easy downloadable format at heroparanormal.podbean.com. It's smoking fast and quick and easy. That's also a full archive at that location that you can check out, and you can become a patron and get all the secret goodies, extra episodes, and the like. Go to YouTube and like and subscribe there. It is under Hero Paranormal. Until next time, keep your eyes to the skies, feet on the ground, but don't forget to take a look around.
Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Evazine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off. Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Evazine. Blast